Welcome back, everyone. I'm Professor D. Booz, and this is Free School Black Studies, the learning series. I am your learning facilitator and guide, and we are in week 5 of 6. We're coming to the end here. So we have this week and next week, and that's a wrap. But I hope that you've been getting a lot from this series because I have certainly been getting a lot putting it together for you today. And As always, our goal is to develop an understanding of Black studies through a study of liberation questions, and we look at different figures each week. Last week, we analyzed the Pan-African performing artist Miriam Makeba. Today, we are going to turn to study a new figure, and this figure is going to be a little bit different. So let me just get him on the slide here. Today, we are analyzing Maurice Bishop. And Maurice Bishop is different from the other folks that we have studied in this class in that he is a figure who exercised state power, right? He became a prime minister in his home country and exercised power within the state. Okay. And so he is a revolutionary socialist. And so there's much to learn and explore. And to get into the life and work of Maurice Bishop, we have to go to the tiny island nation of Grenada. Now, Grenada is just 120 square miles. It's located in the Caribbean Sea. It is tiny, but it is consequential. It's about 100 miles from Venezuela, which is, of course, on the South American continent. And Grenada, notably, was formerly a colony of Great Britain. And at the time of its independence in 1974, the population was small, very small. I mean, still very small, but at the time it was just about 95,000 people. And so, for comparison, that would be about the size of a small US city like Yuma, Arizona is somewhere around 100,000 people, but this would be the entire population of the nation, right? So small. However, despite its small size, Grenada is a nation who dared to plot its own political course in the last quarter of the 20th century. And so we are going to attempt to understand that daring activity of Grenada. And to do that, we have to talk about the process and their own period of decolonization, right? Now, they are decolonizing in an era of decolonization. There were waves of decolonization globally. And so we have to understand a context of decolonization. And well, what do I mean by that? Well, after World War II, decolonization was happening a lot of places. Let me show you what I mean. Well, map for orientation. Here's Grenada, right? This is going to be important so we understand where we are in the world, right? Decolonization. So, if you take a look at this map, you can see early decolonization happening in Asia. In 1947, you can see that we have India and the creation of Pakistan, which are some of the very famous early new nations in this period post World War II. Right. And if you think back with me, specifically to our material on Malcolm X, he spoke about the Bandung Conference, which actually took place in Indonesia in 1955. And Malcolm was explaining that the conference was a gathering place for non-white people to get together, talk shop about nationalism and political determination. And so a little bit more about the history of that specific conference is this. Indonesia, India, Pakistan, the countries then known as Burma and Ceylon, organized a meeting for Asian and African nation states so that they could get together, discuss, and strategize around political issues of importance to them. And from that meeting, unsurprisingly, came a strong rejection of the colonialism that was still ongoing in many places in the world, right? That conference is in 1955. You can just take a look at that map and see that a lot of places were still colonized, okay? But you can also see waves of decolonization, right? From the mid 1950s to the 1960s, it was an especially robust time for decolonization in Africa. And so, this is one of the reasons that Malcolm X could be so optimistic about Black nationalism and the power of African unity before his assassination in 1965. Okay, let's go to the next slide here. Now, on the other side of the world, in the Americas, there are important developments that are also happening. First off, we know that since the end of World War II, the US had expressed an anti communism that hardened right into a Cold War. We also know that inside the United States from the 1950s and into the 1960s, civil rights and Black power activism was underway. Okay, so these are major things that are happening over here, right? And these Black political developments were important in the Caribbean because not only did news travel, but people, right? Many people traveled, right? Folks in the Caribbean will spend time studying or even migrating to the United States. And it's even more important to note that many West Indians studied and migrated to the UK and Canada to even greater degrees than they did in the United States. Okay. Consider this. Stokely Carmichael was from Trinidad, right? He was born in Trinidad and lived his early years there before he went to New York City. We can also think about how Carmichael, as he was evolving his politics from Black power into revolutionary Pan-Africanism, he was traveling all over, right? He was traveling to Africa and to Asia, but he was also traveling to the UK. He was also traveling to France. He was also traveling to Canada and Cuba. Then we have folks like Walter Rodney, who was born in Guyana in South America, but he studied undergraduate in Jamaica, and then he did advanced studies in African history in London. In fact, for several years after he goes to the University of Dar es Salaam and he teaches there, but he even teaches in the United States. He teaches at places like Cornell University and SUNY Binghamton. So my point here is that we should understand a connected Black world when we're thinking about this period. Let's see what else we have on this map. Okay, so we got a connected Black world, and well, not just Black world, we have a connected world, a connected decolonizing world. And we're having a world that is profoundly affected by the two global superpowers fighting this Cold War. Okay. And so this is our context for Grenada in 1973 on the eve of its own independence. Okay. Now, I'm going to get into this complex history of Maurice Bishop in Grenada, but first I want to have a roadmap. So let us take a look at that roadmap. We're going to do it in three parts. The first one is the takeover. The second is the revolution. The third is the American invasion. Those are our three parts. Each section will be briefish. I strongly encourage you, if you haven't already, to consult the readings for this week to better understand the colonial legacies and the complex developments in this history, because it's complex, right? But we're going to hit the broad strokes here, okay? All right, so with that said, let us switch to the next slide. So Grenada, in 1973, the country was on the brink of independence, but it was on the brink of independence under a leader named Eric Gairy. Eric Gairy had been the premier of Grenada from 1967 through to independence, okay? Now, that's a longest stretch for power, and so he has accumulated power and privilege of office. And from this power and privilege of office, he's able to win loyal supporters. This is important, okay? So he has these folks who are with him in the country. However, there were divisions in the society, with some people supporting Gairy and others starkly opposed. And the opposition had various grievances, which could include class differences and conflicts, but it also did include accusations of corruption and violence. While Gary was desiring to maintain his power, he would often lead and lean into authoritarianism. He became infamous, in fact, for his sanctioning of excessive police force, but also extrajudicial use of an enforcer group called the Mongoose Gang. And it was started around about 1970, and these enforcers were armed and would violently attack and terrorize. As a result, despite the fact that Gary was a strong nationalist and was happy to lead Grenada into independence, there were many people in the nation who were not interested in independence under Gary, liked independence, but didn't like the idea of it under Gary. Prime in this opposition were members of the recently consolidated opposition groups, now calling themselves the New Jewel Movement. Okay. Now, New Jewel. Jewel is an acronym that stood for Joint Endeavor for Welfare, Education, and Liberation, right? So, New Joint Endeavor for Welfare, Education, and Liberation, New Jewel. So by 1973, this New Jewel movement had a significant base of people, especially younger people, who were opposed to Gary's government. And a prominent leader emerges from this new movement, and he was well educated, he was legally trained, he was very charismatic, and of course, he was Maurice Bishop. Okay. Now, as the date for Grenada's independence grew closer, the New Jewel movement helped to organize and encourage protest activities, including walkouts and shutdowns and strikes, to register dissatisfaction with the Gary regime and really try to encourage Britain to hold off with the power transfer under Gary's rule. Now, this activity raised the ire of Gary, and in 1973, leading members of the New Jewel movement were violently attacked by police. And this included Maurice Bishop, who reportedly suffered from a broken jaw. Now, that activity stimulated, those injuries of these leaders of this popular movement stimulated national protests by their supporters. In these protests, a tragic series of events occurred in which Maurice Bishop's father, Rupert Bishop, was shot and killed as he was trying to help some women and youth protesters who were fleeing from some of the state-supported enforcers. And so it was in that context that Gary inherited power from Great Britain and became the first prime minister of an independent Grenada on February 7th, 1974. And here on the slide here, you can actually see someone who is raising the flag. And I believe it was like done right at midnight, but it's dark, right? Because part of the strikes are folks who are working with the electricity company, right? So it is an interesting time to say the least. Okay. So the power shift changes. The movement's not able to stop that. But that didn't stop them from agitating against Gary either. In fact, they had already decided in 1973 that they were going to figure out multiple means to try to remove Gary from power and to obtain it for their own purposes. So in March 1973, they wrote the Manifesto of the New Jewel Movement for Power to the People and for Achieving Real Independence for Grenada, Carriacou, and the Grenadian Grenadines. It stated in part, quote, "The people are being cheated and have been cheated for too long, cheated by both parties for over 20 years. Nobody is asking what the people want. We suffer low wages and higher cost of living while the politicians get richer, live in bigger houses, and drive around in even bigger cars. The government has done nothing to help people build decent houses. Most people still have to walk miles to get water to drink after 22 years of politicians. If we fall sick, we catch hell to get quick and cheap medical treatment. Half of us can't find steady work. The place is getting from bad to worse every day, except for the politicians. The police are being used in politics these days, and people are getting more and more blows from them. Government workers who don't toe the Gary line are getting fired left and right. Even the magistrates better look out. The government has no idea how to improve agriculture, how to set up industries, how to improve housing, health, education, and general well-being of the people. They have no ideas for helping the people. All they know how is to take people's money for themselves while the people scrape and scrunt for a living. 20 years of the GNP and the GULP have made us believe that there is no way out of this blasted mess, but there is. The time is now to do something about it. What we want to do in this manifesto is to give a rough idea of a way out. We can start by looking at some of the ways in which we can set about to wipe out poverty in Grenada. So these are the opening lines, some of the opening lines from the manifesto from the New Jewel movement. And we can hear the group's frustration, right? They are in the society and people are suffering and they're very frustrated about this, right? But we can also hear their determination for better. There's very strong determination here. And perhaps as we think about these lines, we can see how they would touch people in Grenada, right? Especially at a time when revolution, right, is not something that just seems possible. It is the watchword of the period. Remember, right, Carmichael, ready for revolution, right? It is a watchword. So, okay, that's how the manifesto opens. Well, listen to how it closes, right? It has visions for a new and better Grenadian society to open it up, but to close it, they have a very clear aim. They say this, quote, "In the new society, all our people will be encouraged to find answers to the questions. Who are we? What is the nature of our condition? Why are we in that condition? What can we do to change that condition? What can we change it to? We know that none of this is possible under the present setup. Our first task, therefore, is the destruction of Garyism and the system it represents. To this end, we of the New Jewel movement dedicate ourselves." This is the end, right? They are promising to take the fight to him, and the fight was on. Okay, so the next few years, the New Jewel movement is going to make it their mission to challenge the Gary regime at every turn, but they also participate in elections, right? So you're looking here, you can see campaign material from Maurice Bishop in 1976, right? They're moving in multiple avenues, but they are also plotting revolution. And that coup would come to fruition on March 13th, 1979. Okay. So that day, Eric Gary is leaving the country on business, and according to the New Jewel leadership, he gave orders to his henchmen to kill the leadership of the New Jewel movement in his absence. This is what they say. Okay. And so the New Jewel movement says instead they took the offensive and they took over the military barracks and they took over police stations and they used the radio to encourage the masses of people in the society to help them overturn Gary's government. And they were ultimately successful. Right? The army surrendered their weapons and Gary fled to exile in the United States. So I have a little clip here that is some footage from the immediate aftermath of that time. So let's give it a play.
Radio Grenada is the headquarters of the new revolutionary government, still so heavily guarded that we were allowed to film only outside the steel wire compound. In fact, the new leaders here aren't keen on having any of their soldiers filmed at all. We don't want to give the impression that people here are living under the gun, they say. But whether Grenadians are behind the revolution by choice or by force, there's no doubt that the new revolutionary government is in full control. White flags of surrender fly from the island's police stations, which are now occupied by armed supporters of the government. They're mostly young people in their teens or early 20s, carrying a weird assortment of mostly ancient rifles. The barracks that used to house soldiers loyal to the former Prime Minister, Sir Eric Gairy, have been burned to the ground. Inside, a picture of the Queen trooping the colour had been torn from the wall. The new self-proclaimed Prime Minister is a young London-trained barrister and a long-time political enemy of Sir Eric, Mr. Maurice Bishop.
We had received information on the Saturday before the Tuesday that the intention of the government was to search us and detain us. We decided to go underground. While we were underground, more information came to us on the Monday morning that the plan was that Gairy was going to flee the country, leaving orders to have our leadership killed. We therefore, around 3 o'clock, summoned a council, a meeting of our top cadres, and there and then the decision was taken that we should move rather than wait to be killed. And I think the proof of the acceptance and successfulness of the revolution is the fact that business places have reopened immediately, no problems on that. Tourists, as you see, have continued to come to our shores. The American residents, including medical students, have not left. And of course, if you observe the entirely peaceful character of the revolution, in a sense, no bloodletting.
And Mr. Gairy, what of him?
We want him back here for trial for murder, conspiracy to murder, for mass fraud, for corruption, that sort of thing.
It's difficult to test Mr. Bishop's claim that he has the full support of all the islanders, but he has the guns and he has the radio station. And for the moment, at least, that seems to be enough. Norman Rees, ITN, in Grenada.
Okay, so we could hear here that the reporter is a bit skeptical of this revolution, but he's also not particularly sympathetic to Gairy either, right? And so we can see here how the New Jewel movement had taken power. Okay, let's move along. Now, despite the danger of political instability after a coup, the New Jewel movement was able to sustain itself with massive support from the people, at least in the short run. It released reports of their efforts to fight poverty and joblessness, and they were incorporating the people into new projects for building schools and improving infrastructure, getting things like piped water and better roads. And they did all of this as they were pursuing socialist ideologies and practices, right? And you can see the ideas and beliefs and aims for the New Jewel movement through this flyer that has their statement of principles here, right? It called for things like full employment and healthcare according to need and cooperative economics, Black liberation, right? These are, to me, very striking in how similar to they are to the 10-point program for the Black Panther Party, for example, right? And just like them, right, they are calling for nothing short of a new society, a new Grenadian society. And they sought direct participation from community people to make that society a reality. So on the screen here, I have some images from a 1981 book that was published by Grenadian revolutionaries. And the book is called Is Freedom We're Making? The New Democracy in Grenada. And if you look here, the images highlighted in this book are very intentional. What they're showing you are young and old folks, mixed genders, and all of these folks are engaged in community care of buildings and facilities, right? They're engaged in literacy programs. If you look here, you can see a sign on one of the buildings that says, if you know, teach. If you don't, learn, right? There are national infrastructure, civil infrastructure projects and farming projects. I think we have some of those on the next slide here. Yes, right. You can see the children here under a sign that says, long live the people's revo, right? For short for revolution. Forward ever, backward never, fight harder, work harder, study harder, right? Using these slogans, these signs to encourage the youth. And revolutionary Grenada really put an emphasis on children and youth and tried to ensure that they were active participants in the society and had roles and responsibilities. Now, in the same way, elders were included and encouraged to learn new things as revolutionaries in the society felt that it would be necessary for them to participate in this, and they would be needed to help to transform the entire society. Okay, now, those are things that are positive, but of course, not everything about the revolution was positive. Some people, for a variety of reasons, didn't agree with the new socialist vision of society, or they simply had critiques to offer, right? This is always going to be the case. Unfortunately, some of those people, or many of those people, were socially ostracized, which is a significant loss when you think about a small nation like Grenada. It's a very small society, so those would be serious losses. And far worse than that, very many, at least 1,000 people were imprisoned for unclear reasons, political reasons, or no reason or formal charge given at all, right? Just imprisoned, okay? And these this thousand people, right, would be about 10% of the entire Grenadian population. So no small percentage in this small island nation being imprisoned because they are determined to be some kind of threat, right? And so what I would like for us to do is to listen to this clip from the film Forward Ever, The Killing of a Revolution. And we'll hear these folks from the community remarking about the revolution's underbelly. So let's watch.
Of 1978, I was presented to the bar by Maurice Bishop, and I started getting involved in the human rights type of practice. And as time goes by, there was a view from some quarters that I was too taken up with human rights. And in July 1981, we decided to publish a newspaper. Leslie Pierre was spearheading a move to get a newspaper going, because at the time the Torchlight was closed. There was no independent newspaper in Grenada. The PRG, the People's Revolutionary Government, passed a law stating that to get involved in the newspaper business, there must be a company with at least 26 shareholders. They refer to the previous law as being bourgeois, because any individual could have set up a newspaper. So Leslie Pierre went around and tried to identify persons, got about 26 of us, we established a newspaper. And after the second publication, the newspaper was closed down. Leslie Pierre, Lloyd Noel, and myself, we were detained.
Too many people were believing the propaganda statements, and there was no means of people knowing the truth, not only in respect of the paper, but in respect of what was happening in the country. Because they had programmed or conditioned the people of Grenada into some sort of support for them through their own illegal paper prior to the coup in 1979. And they knew the power of the press. So they wanted to smother any effort at a free press, because it wasn't in their interest, of course, to have the truth be told about what was happening in the country.
It is important for us to start by saying that all revolutions involve dislocation. Anyone who does not admit that is dishonest.
I was never asked a single question, although I had been brought in for questioning. There was no attempt to lay a charge against me. There was not even a farcical trial as they had with some other people against whom they alleged that they had people who were alleged to have committed offenses.
Our course was to detain those people who were threats to national security. And it has to be very, very clearly understood that in any situation of a revolution, there must be counter-revolution for a period. And therefore, a necessary period of dislocation must result. The choice is between firing squad, pretended shootout in the hills, as so many people like to do, pretended accidents, or in fact detention. And that was the course that we chose.
Had the Grenadian community resisted what was going on, our history would have been quite different. But people were not prepared to resist. Once you're in authority and you have force, everybody just decided to go along.
No one is ever interfered with for what he says. No one is ever interfered with for what he writes. In fact, today, criticism is deeper than ever in the society in a constructive way. But our people also understand that the first law of the revolution is that a revolution must survive, must consolidate, so more benefits can come to them.
Okay, so we can hear from that video a couple of different perspectives here, but I think you can see that there are some developments that are problematic. So we have the apparent state's displeasure at robust human rights advocacy for dissidents, and the state's willingness to lock up political opponents, and these are ominous developments for the society, despite the rationalizations that we can hear from Bishop in this clip. Now, outside of Grenada, Bishop worked hard to shore up support for his nation in the world, recognizing the hostility of anti-communist nations, especially that of the United States, and recognizing this early on. Bishop started off critiquing the US for its imperialist practices. In the first year of the revolution in Grenada, Grenada in September of 1979, he spoke in fiery tones in Havana, Cuba, at the conference of the Movement of Non-Aligned Countries. He said this, quote, "The revolutionary process, which has seen the emergence of progressive revolutions in countries like Angola, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau, Ethiopia, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and most recently, Nicaragua and Iran, has had vital impact on the balance of forces in today's world. Gone are the days of unbridled imperialist control and domination of the world. In place of this anachronism, we have the emergence of the third world as an important force in the world today, and this development has been significantly aided by the assertive role of the socialist world under the leadership of the USSR, and we in the third world must express our fraternal thanks." Okay, so this is Bishop in the first year of the revolution. Here we just have that quote here. You can see that it happened at this conference for the Non-Aligned in September of 1979. If you look here, right, you can see that he's there with Michael Manley, the Prime Minister of Jamaica, as well as Fidel Castro and the Secretary General of the UN. Now, over time, Bishop would try to calm political fears and normalize relations with the United States, especially because the Grenadian economy needed help and would be buoyed by American tourist dollars. Bishop even officially visited the United States in 1983. He met with press and higher level officials, including the Assistant Secretary of the State, although the president and the vice president wouldn't meet with him. And here on the slide, you can see a picture of Bishop speaking at Hunter College in New York. And he's speaking under a banner that's raised for him. And that banner says, "Welcome, Prime Minister Bishop. Welcome, Prime Minister Maurice Bishop. Grenada is not alone." Unfortunately, by mid-1983, the love and praise Bishop received from many abroad was not shared in many of his closest political circles. Instead, the internal contradiction of Grenada's revolutionary policies seemed to pile up, and the grinding problems of running a government with limited resources, lofty goals, and hostile political forces externally and some internally contributed to an atmosphere that wearied the leadership and soured some members on Maurice Bishop's own leadership. Now, in oversimplified terms, we can say that the Central Committee, of which Bishop was a part, developed significant disagreements over the political direction of the nation. Some in the Central Committee felt that Bishop had some of the skills necessary for leading the country in an appropriately Marxist Leninist manner. And they believed, but only some. And they believed the nation and the revolution would be better served if he assumed joint leadership with Bernard Cord, the Minister of Finance, and a former member of the Central Committee who had already resigned from the committee prior to this. Bishop initially agreed, but then he ultimately determined that the shared leadership proposal was a demotion, and so he began to try to resist it. But most members of the Central Committee then doubled down on the proposal, and it created a very serious power struggle. Now, in the struggle, Bishop came to believe that key members, maybe even a majority of members on the Central Committee, were conspiring against him and that his life might be in danger. And so he spread the word to some supporters. The Central Committee, or it said that he spread the word among some supporters. The Central Committee members reacted to this development, because word did spread among people, by placing Bishop under house arrest on October 13th, 1983, as they decided their next steps. This is perhaps because they had not shared with the general public this idea of power sharing with Cord and Bishop, and perhaps they knew that the majority of people greatly identified the Grenadian Revolution with Bishop, right? He served as this symbol of the revolution, this symbol as a leader, and might be concerned about the idea of power being taken from him. After the house arrest, though, things quickly degenerated, right? So he's under house arrest. And on October 14th, a communication goes over the radio that says that Cord had replaced Bishop as prime minister, but then that statement is retracted. However, the public begins to protest over Bishop's sustained house arrest, because he's still on house arrest as of October 18th. The following day, on October 19th, 1983, Bishop's supporters march into the house and they free him. They encourage him to go to the public square and to address the nation from the square, but Bishop wants to go to Fort Rupert, where it is said that he believed that he would have telecommunication access to be able to reach people. Turned out to be a fatefully bad decision. So Grenadian military forces were given orders to retake the fort and to use whatever means. And so they did so, and they did so violently, dispersing the crowd and killing many. They used tanks for support, shot at the fort until Bishop and those gathered there with him surrendered. Upon surrender, military members on site lined up important leaders of the New Jewel movement who were there, including Prime Minister Maurice Bishop, and riddled them with bullets. It was a massacre. And you can see the images of some of the folks who were lost here and the names of those folks on the slide here. Once this occurred, military order was then declared, and a revolutionary military council took over and had that control for just under a week. Why just under a week? Well, at that point, on October 25th, 1983, under orders by President Ronald Reagan, the US military troops invaded the island, and they brought something like 1,900 troops with them onto the island. I would like for us to take a moment and look at this so you can see what it looked like when they arrived, and like for us to also just take a listen to this clip, short clip from a documentary about Ronald Reagan, where we can hear Reagan in his own words about the invasion, but we can also hear an American perspective on the invasion as well and the developments in Grenada. And so I think they're they're both important to think through. So let's listen.
Early the next morning, after more than 1,900 Army Rangers and Marines had landed at 2 points on Grenada, the White House announced the news of the Grenada rescue operation to the press.
Grenada, we were told, was a friendly island paradise for tourism. Well, it wasn't. It was a Soviet-Cuban colony being readied as a major military bastion to export terror and undermine democracy. We got there just in time.
Our forces, despite greater than expected resistance, quickly gained control of the island's 2 airports, secured the campus where the American students were, and the Marxists and Cuban puppeteers were defeated.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Please be seated. Well, Secretary Weinberger, General Vesey, and all of you students and all of the men and women who are here in uniform, I'm so glad to meet you and to be able to say it officially, welcome home.
President Reagan said he believed his decision to stand up to Castro and the brown shirts in Grenada not only stopped the communists in their tracks in that part of the world, but perhaps helped all Americans stand a little taller. But if that particular week produced one of the highest of the high points of his 8 years in the White House, the bombing of the Marine barracks in Beirut had produced the lowest of the low.
Okay, so having listened to that, we could hear Reagan essentially saying that Grenada was preparing to export terror on behalf of the Soviets and Cubans, and this is why they invaded, in addition to protecting American lives. And so, I pose it to you. Does that sound logic to you? Because this is what America was offered when it happened in the 1980s. Okay, so we've come to the end of this lecture. It's a longer one because of the as I said, the complicated dynamics here, and so and I want to leave you with that complexity, right? I have you on the slide here 2 images, both taken by journalists from America. On the left, there's a child standing next to a mural, and it reads, "Thanks to the USA." On the right, there are some women with signs, and one of them is holding a sign that says, "Bishop, liberator of Grenada, Reagan, oppressor of Grenada." All right. And just in the back here, you have a woman who's holding a second sign that says, "Reagan, free South Africa now." And so I want you to ponder this, right? What meaning can we make of this, right? These 2 kind of very different images and responses to the United States presence in Grenada in the 1980s. And so no answers here, because I want us to discuss these things on Thursday. Why do these contradicting messages exist? What is that about? Also for Thursday, right, for our big discussion question, our liberatory discussion question, I want us to think about this. So the Grenadian Revolution explicitly aimed for Black liberation. They spelled it out literally in their manifesto, and they sought to work systematically rather than emotionally to win this liberation. Where do you think things went wrong? What do you think? Where do you think things went wrong? Think on that. We're going to pick it up in our discussion on Thursday, and I look forward to speaking with you then. Until then, each one teach one. Peace.